So I make ceramic sculpture that is predominantly, I think of it as medium sized or small, and depending on your frame of reference. Typically these days, lots of functional forms, but not actually functional. And I'm interested in a dialogue between the ceramic material and also what our experience as people of the earth is like in comparison to that material. I think of clay and people as the same kind of stuff, both geologic in origin and both subject to environmental stress and weathering as we move through the world. So I'm looking at these objects as a type of mirror, in a sense, for our own human experience.
So I think of painting as it's sort of presented as maybe a window into another world. That's kind of the Renaissance view of painting. But if we think about the first paintings, they were in caves, and it was more a portal to talk across generations through kind of like fable imagery. So that's more where I land in this kind of tunnel visioning or cave like space where you have a dedicated time to storytell. Then the materials come in from my relationship to Joseph and Annie Albers, who come out of the Bauhaus movement and were fleeing Germany, sort of cast out from Nazi Germany, and immigrated to the US, thinking about color as relational, as similar to how people relate to each other. You know, if we're alongside someone who's a little bit more buoyant, maybe it brings out a buoyancy in ourselves. Colors can have that quality where you put a bright, vibrant red next to a desaturated neutral green, it's gonna make it glow. It's gonna make it feel like a candy apple. So I do that both in color optically with optical fields and in textiles, sort of bringing Annie back into the story.
I'm a person who, without my glasses, everything is blurry from far away, and so I do that a lot in the studio. I might take my glasses off and look at it from my blurred perspective, and that really helps when I think about how colors fit next to each other because all of a sudden they are interspersed and kind of bleeding into each other in a way that they are not if I have my glasses on. So I'm interested in those relationships particularly, and I want there to be a depth, there to be layers almost visible. For me, artwork is best when it takes me a long time to decipher what I'm looking at. I like that space of interaction. I can also get excited about things that hit really fast, right? But like the art that I live with, the art that I want to spend time with, takes time. And so I try to use colors in ways that break up the surface and the experience of the viewer to make it as long as it can take. Like I am most happy when someone discovers something about the work after several times of being around it that maybe they didn't see the first couple times, and then they tell me about that experience. So really the color usage, I mean, I'm interested in the relationships and the way they offset each other, but also how they might make the form itself take longer to figure out.
Similar to how a lot of comedians deal with a lot of tragedy, and that's how their humor is created. It was sort of a survival tactic. It's same for me in my work. You know, I'm dealing with a lot of really upsetting imagery that I'm sifting through at odd times of night when it hits harder. And the humor is what helps other people kind of sit with me in that sort of shared observation and then kind of hold camaraderie there as we sort of process it together and find some sort of way through.
Yeah, I think that to be a person working with ceramic materials is to, in some way, confront the history present with those materials. It's the oldest medium we have, right? So the first things that we made as humans were usually out of clay. So it's pretty hard to come to it with fresh perspectives, I think. And you're always in dialogue with that history. Anytime I mention to somebody that I do ceramics, first question is always like, tell me about your pottery. And That's not really what I do. It is part of my history, and it's how I learned. And I value that history tremendously. And I love pots, use pots, care about potters all the time, and teach potters also. But in the end, that wasn't my path. And so the work, in a sense, I think comes from a sensibility about the vessel and about functional forms that I learned through years of practicing that skill set, but also extends into a more conceptual and abstracted space, because that ultimately wasn't the thing that I found made me most satisfied as an artist. But I think to be in clay one way or another, you confront this regularly. And so learning where you fit as an artist in that regard is important if you're going to work in ceramics.
I think that what is hopefully possible with this work is that by seeing that it is a playbook that has a set of symbols and it has a set of aesthetics, it is also something that can be eroded, and it can be figured out as a language, and then a new language can be built in counter to it. And that's where the triangle pendants come up too. They are the hammerheads sort of finding their way against all of the propaganda. You know, how do they maybe not always succeed in a linear fashion? You know, a lot of the time they're kind of failing spectacularly themselves. You know, the trees are falling over them and they've uprooted them, but now they're a force upon them. But they keep going nonetheless, and that is kind of hilarious, maybe slapstick humor, but it has that sort of sense of like it just keeps going at it. You know, it's sort of hopefully insistent in its joy. You know, it's gonna find a way together.
I think that this is an excellent pairing, and I really appreciate Janet's both color usage and the amount of materials that are kind of pushed up next to each other in these works. I mean, seeing Janet's work online, I don't know that I fully understood the range of material that she's working with. And so, just as I was saying about like time to understand what a person is seeing being a factor in terms of how I digest work and how I enjoy work, Janet's work does that super well for me, because I can spend plenty of time just formally considering the shape of these objects, and only then, after several looks at it, discover that there are these characters involved in the story being told. So it takes a really skilled hand and a really developed sort of mindset to put objects right up against each other in the same composition and have it actually work well. None of these objects, for me, evoke any kind of dissonance that is not helpful, right? Like, it's all good. And I think that's really tricky to do.
Being paired with Andrew is fascinating because he's looking at ceramics from a much more abstract way, but in a very similarly embodied way, where the forces are visualized. Something that we can't always point to is now there with us, and we can see how there's consequence when it's physicalized. I also am a deep admirer of his glaze work. As a painter, they're very painterly, and they have that ability to involve chance, which I think ceramics is perfect for. And also it's that humbling part of it. You know, it can fully disintegrate, and it can break down in front of you. So I always think ceramicists who, whether that's their main practice, have a real sort of synergy with their material. They let it be what it is, and there is actually a giving up of control. So it's a nice pair, you know. My work is very meticulous and managed, and then Andrew's is very open and sort of immersive in that way.